And tonight, in a Hannity exclusive, we reveal the video that, by their very own admission, friends of Barack Obama have been keeping under lock and key. Now, the existence of this footage has been the subject of widespread speculation on the internet for many months, and the rumor mill kicked into high gear at CPAC in February when Andrew Breitbart said this.
Well, I've got videos, by the way. This election, we're going to vet him. I've got videos. This election, we're going to vet him from his college days to show you why racial division and class warfare are central to what Hope and Change was sold in 2008. The videos are going to come out. The narrative is going to come out.
Now, sadly, our friend and colleague Andrew Breitbart is not here tonight to help us unveil this video, but thanks to his hard work, we're able to show you the following. Let's go back to 1991, when Barack Obama was president of the Harvard Law Review. Now, during that same year, Obama spoke at a protest in support of a controversial professor named Derrick Bell. Now, in a moment, we'll dig deeper into some of the late Professor Bell's controversial views. But first, let's take a look at a very rare piece of video. Now, this is an edited portion of the future president's introduction of Bell that was released by BuzzFeed.com earlier today.
And I remember that the black law students had organized an orientation for the first-year students. And one of the persons who spoke at that orientation was Professor Bell. And I remember him sauntering up to the front and not giving us a lecture, but engaging us in a conversation and speaking the truth, and telling us that he has to learn at this place, that I've carried with me ever since. Now, how did this one man do all this? How's he accomplished all this? He hasn't done it simply by his good looks and easy charm, although he has both in ample measure. He hasn't done it simply because of the excellence of his scholarship, although his scholarship has opened up new vistas and new horizons and changed the standards of what legal writing is about. Open up your hearts and your minds to the words of Professor Derrick Bell.
Now, what the edited version of that video did not show you was that seconds later, Barack Obama embraced Bell before turning the microphone over to the controversial professor. However, that footage was intentionally covered up, according to a close confidant of the president, and that's Harvard professor Charles Ogletree. But in this next video, discovered by Andrew Breitbart and his team, you'll see Ogletree playing an extended version of the 1991 protest during one of his lectures in 2011 at Harvard University. Let's watch this.
Open up your hearts and your minds to the words of Professor Derrick Bell.
Now, that hug and the president's association with a radical professor like Bell is no doubt going to become a hot topic in coming days. However, what is most disturbing about this footage from Ogletree's lecture is that he openly admits hiding this video during the 2008 election, apparently in order to protect his friend Barack Obama. Take a look at this.
Now, what makes this so interesting when you think about it, of course, we hid this throughout the 2008 campaign, so no, I don't care if they find it now, but right, because it just told you that.
So why did Charles Ogletree believe that this footage would embarrass candidate Obama so gravely that he chose to suppress the tape during the 2008 election? What was he attempting to hide from voters? Now, here with some answers are two men who helped uncover this video. Ben Shapiro is the editor at large at Breitbart.com, and Joel Pollack, he is Breitbart.com's editor-in-chief. Gentlemen, welcome to Hannity.
Thanks for having us.
Nice to be here.
Joel, let me begin with you. There's a lot to this. It gets very complicated, but I think it's easy to explain. We have what was said by then student Barack Obama. We have who he was associating with, controversial association again, radical, I would even argue, and we'll get to that. And then we have the issue of the effort to suppress this video from the American people. That deals with Mr. Ogletree, Professor Ogletree, and the media and what culpability they have. Let's start at the beginning here. Joel, we'll start with you. Why don't we tell the background of the story and explain it in your own words?
Well, the real background is that Barack Obama participated in this protest and in other events that there exists evidence of, and this was hidden for a long time, not just by Charles Ogletree, but within the archive of WGBH, which refused even to respond when we asked for access to it. What's happening here is a protest, and it's not about faculty diversity on campus. This is about Derrick Bell, who was going to take a voluntary unpaid leave of absence to protest a tenure decision and to make sure that there was more racial diversity on campus and so on. But Derrick Bell was a radical. Derrick Bell was the Jeremiah Wright of academia. He had some crazy views. In fact, just 2 months before this speech was given, Derrick Bell gave a controversial speech in Chicago where he said that America remains a racist country and the civil rights movement essentially was a sham because white supremacy remains the system and we've got to transform that system radically in order to get rid of racism. And so those views were well known at the time, and this was not about diversity, which is a noble and good cause. This was about radical ideology, racial ideology. And when Barack Obama says, open your hearts and open your minds to the words of Professor Derrick Bell and calls him an inspiration and talks about his scholarship, he's talking about some very radical things, so radical that later on Derrick Bell got into serious trouble when he wrote an essay, a fictional story called Space Traders, positing that Americans, white Americans, would sell black Americans to space aliens in order to pay off the national debt, and that Jews would stand by and let it happen. This is the kind of background Derrick Bell had.
Well, wasn't that also in the form of, do you believe those were his views? Because as I understood, that was in a book, but these were characters that were making these statements. Is that correct?
It certainly is his view of the civil rights struggle. He writes a futuristic science fiction story about race, but it's really telling the story of the civil rights struggle. He thinks that basically white people sold blacks out and that Jews who pretended to be helpful to black people during the civil rights struggle backed away when they saw it was no longer in their self-interest. That's what he believes about the civil rights struggle. He believed it when he was teaching at Harvard Law School when Obama embraced him, and he believed it several years afterward. And he had fights, by the way, with other black faculty members at Harvard who said that some of Bell's views were so extreme that they were very problematic. So this is not about racial diversity. It's not about gender diversity. Derrick Bell was the Jeremiah Wright of academia, and Barack Obama embraced him and endorsed his views.
Ben, let me go to you on this question. We'll get to the media side of it. We have another segment that we're going to follow up with here as it relates to the media, because I think this is an entirely separate issue. One of the things that I tried to do in 2007 and 2008, and I know that it was Eric Rush, he broke the story about Jeremiah Wright. We followed it. We investigated black liberation theology. We looked into Bill Ayers and Bernardine Dorn. The media only asked, you know, in light of all the questions Republican candidates are being asked now in their vetting process, he was asked one time about Bill Ayers, an unrepentant terrorist, who he had many associations with, boards, speeches, started his political career in his house. So what are we to gain from this? Looking at a controversial professor, he's a little younger here. Is it more controversial that he hung out with Ayers and Dorn later in life and Jeremiah Wright? Or is this just a bigger picture, a broader pattern that...
I think there's something different in kind here, right? I mean, if you look at Bernardine Dorn and Bill Ayers, they associated with one another, they talked with one another, but we don't really know what they said to one another. We don't really know how they felt about one another. Obama has made a living basically distancing himself from people like Ayers and Dorn and Jeremiah Wright and throwing them under the bus and so forth. Here, this is a clean bust, right? He's not just saying, you know, I was just sitting in the pews. He wasn't just saying, you know, I just served on a board with him. He's saying, open your hearts and your minds to the words of Professor Derrick Bell. So if you're going to open your hearts and your minds to the words of Professor Derrick Bell, well, if you want us to do that, now we actually have to look at what are the words of Professor Derrick Bell. And again, this is not 20 years ago. It's important to recognize that Derrick Bell and Barack Obama remained associates for the rest of Derrick Bell's life. He just died about a year ago, and Derrick Bell was writing op-eds in defense of Barack Obama and Jeremiah Wright during the 2008 election cycle. You know,
this does raise questions because President Obama did promise that he would be the most transparent president in American history. we had this issue, if we remember, back in the 2008 campaign with the Los Angeles Times, and they have this video in which Barack Obama lavished praise on Rashid Khalidi, who was a former mouthpiece of Yasser Arafat. That was never released by the LA Times. So as we look at these this tape and we look at this, yes, open your hearts and minds to Derrick Bell in this particular case, and we'll go into more of his background here. What are people to grab from this more than anything else? Is it that Barack Obama seems to always gravitate towards the most radical people?
There's no question about that. There's no question about that. And I think that the other thing that we're going to talk about, obviously, is the fact that the media cover-up here was very real. Ogletree's cover-up here was very real. And the fact is that, what Andrew Breitbart stood for in his life was turning people into citizen journalists. It was the idea that we weren't going to allow the elite media to decide what was a story and what was not a story. We weren't going to rely on them to vet the candidates. He said in that speech that you played earlier, Sean, that our job is to vet the President of the United States. That was Andrew's job. That's our job. That's everybody's job. Yeah. And I think what's so important, honestly, what's amazing about this video in particular is it was seriously open to anyone. This was not hidden. We were actually able to find, I mean, it was hidden by them, but it wasn't hidden from the media. If the media had really wanted to do the legwork, they could have found this stuff. They could have tracked down, just what was his association with Derrick Bell. Right, meanwhile, they're checking, Sarah Palin's random emails.
All right, I'll tell you what we'll do. When we get back, we'll talk about why Professor Ogletree was bragging. I don't care if they look at it now, and sounds like they were hiding it back then, and the reasons for that. We're also going to look at the media and why they never asked questions about Ayers and Wright to the extent that, or especially Bill Ayers in that case, only one time, and what this means in terms of what did they know, when did they know it, and what does it mean for journalism and the media in this country. And we'll have more of our exclusive look at the Obama tapes. Andrew Breitbart had promised voters in his final days. Also, Michelle Malkin, Juan Williams, they'll weigh in with reaction, and also coming up tonight, you'll see two congresswomen confronted on the issue of whether or not there's a double standard as it relates to Bill Maher and his donation of $1 million to Obama's PAC. That and much more tonight on Hannity. And we continue with our Hannity exclusive tonight, a first look at the Obama tapes that the late Andrew Breitbart promised to release at CPAC this year. Rejoining me from Breitbart.com, Joel Pollack and Ben Shapiro. All right, let's go back to Professor Ogletree. Now, this is, 2011, and this is him bragging. Well, I don't care if they see it now, because is he referring to having hidden them leading up to the 2008 election? Let's roll that tape.
Now, what makes this so interesting when you think about it, of course, we hid this throughout the 2008 campaign, so no, I don't care if they find it now, but right, because it just told you that.
So this is important. Explain, Joel, we'll go to you. Explain how the media selectively edited this, and you guys you're saying you're releasing the whole thing. You're showing a hug that the media didn't show. You're showing Ogletree who's saying, hey, wait a minute. We didn't want you to see this. Ha ha, I don't care if you get it now. Explain the media aspect of this.
Well, the background is there have been countless biographies and journalistic articles and accounts of Obama's time at Harvard Law School. And this speech that he gave about Derrick Bell is mentioned and referenced in many of them, but nobody bothered, either through laziness or active suppression, to find out what Obama said and what his connection was with Derrick Bell, and to find out more about who Derrick Bell is and what he believed. In fact, it's amazing. If you look at all the articles, it's just unbelievable. And then for Ogletree to actually come back and say, hey, we kept this hidden during 2008. Now, PBS says, well, we aired some of it at the time, but they didn't give you the audio. They didn't give you, and it's a slice and dice 6 ways to Sunday operation where they try to shift your eyes away from this relationship that Obama had with Bell and the admiration and endorsement that Obama gives to Bell.
Yeah, basically, Sean, the way that it worked on PBS was that PBS played the clips of him hugging Bell, but they blacked out the audio. So they had voices over for the audio, so you have no idea that Obama is actually saying, open your heart, open your mind, and all this kind of stuff. Apparently, now BuzzFeed this morning released the audio, but then it was clipped at the end. So you actually didn't have the audio and the hug in the same clip, which just goes to show how the lengths that they will go, even when they're releasing a story about President Obama that makes him look bad, the lengths that the media will go in order to prevent the whole kind of imagistic truth. And images are so much more powerful than words. When you see him hugging Derrick Bell and you hear the words, that's when you get the full story, not when you get half and not when you get the other half.
Let me go into this a little more deeply, because Ogletree's saying what we heard him say here. I don't care if they find it now. But so the media is releasing only selective portions of this, including BuzzFeed. They don't show the hug. They don't show Ogletree. They don't give the context of who Professor Derrick Bell is here. Now all of a sudden BuzzFeed releases it. Breitbart says it's coming out. You guys announced it's going to come out on the show today. All of a sudden now everyone's starting to show it, but only selective portions. Explain exactly what they're missing and why, because especially in light of all the Republicans being vetted fully, what does it mean that this didn't come out in 2008? And what else are we to expect here?
What this means is that there's a well-known history of associations between Barack Obama and radical figures, and the media at each stage has done whatever it can to suppress it. Either they don't report Reverend Wright's words, or they dismiss the Black Panther case. And in this case, they try to say, well, Bell was for racial diversity on campus. They always try to shift it away from President Barack Obama. We don't want to relitigate the 2008 election. That's not what Andrew wanted. Andrew wanted to go out there and say, look, we're going to do what the mainstream media has never done. We're going to vet Barack Obama. And the fact that everyone is suddenly running around looking for videotapes is exactly what Andrew wanted. This was his model of citizen journalism. And it's only when you put that out there and say, we're going to come after you, do the mainstream media journalists get off their chairs and say, we got to find a way to spin this before somebody else finds it.
Let me see if I have. So this wouldn't be a smoking gun, but it would do two things. It would be another brick in the foundation that I think proves a point I tried to make in 2007 and 8, that this candidate is far more radical, now president, as evidenced by the way he's governed, that he's far more radical than he let on, number one. Number two, the media never did its job. The media, if George Stephanopoulos was on my radio show the day before he asked the one question about Bill Ayers, he started his campaign in his house, gave speeches, sat on boards with him. So the real issue here is the media's culpability. They'll look into every nuance of every Republican, every word that Rick Santorum, Newt Gingrich, and Mitt Romney have ever said, but they won't do this to Obama. Do you think
every tape that they find has been just concealed, right? I mean, you mentioned the Khalidi tape, but I mean, earlier this week, for example, we released a poster showing Barack Obama's name on a poster for a play called The Love Song of Saul Alinsky. He was supposed to speak on a panel about it. Now, we know there's somebody who has a tape of the actual play. She said she's not going to release it to protect Obama. This is how things have been working. And I think the one smoking gun here, the only smoking gun here, there are two smoking guns, actually. First smoking gun is obviously people are covering things up. Period. End of story. Second smoking gun here is Obama is endorsing the words. Yeah, the media and academia, by the way, because Ogletree's an academic. And by the way, you notice what he says there. He says, we hid this. Not I hid this. We hid this. Charles Ogletree was a debate coach for President Obama. So that's worth further investigation. The second smoking gun here is the ideological question, which is Obama actually saying, open your hearts, open your minds to the words of Professor Derrick Bell. That means it's now time for us to investigate, and that's what we'll be doing, the words and the actions of Professor Derrick Bell and how they relate to President Obama's ideology.
Right. And by the way, for the record, we did call Professor Ogletree to get reaction to his comments, but I guess when you put it together, we've got Acorn, we've got Alinsky, we've got Community Organization, we got Ayers, we've got Dorn, we've got Wright, we've got Flager, and we've got very few questions. And on top of that, we also have very little information about his time at both Harvard and Columbia and a thesis. And the question here is, I think, the challenge for the media. And maybe I was right in 2008 and journalism or old journalism is dead, and maybe this is the rise of new journalism. Is there a lot more to expect from you guys? Final question.
Oh, yeah. We've got plenty more, and there will be a lot of it released next week.
All right, guys, we'll be carrying it right here. Thank you so much for being with us.